Hi everybody, I'm Jennifer Tryon. Welcome to the Rope Bowl class. This is the kind of project that comes together so quickly and so easily, but looks really tough. So if you give one of these as a gift, it's definitely gonna leave the recipient wondering, how did you do that? And you're gonna kind of gently inside go, couldn't have been easier. I'm gonna take you through this step by step, and really all we need is your sewing machine, some rope, and some white thread, or thread that matches whatever color rope you're working with. Your homework for this class is to wind 2 full bobbins with your white thread. And I want you to make sure you have some bobbins pre-wound on hand, because you should go through at least 2 of them. You'll probably have to change the bobbin twice. There we go. And just keep these on standby. So we're doing white on white today. You're going to want to make sure you're using a zigzag stitch. Now I'm using the big Continental M7, but you can use whatever sewing machine you have. Almost every single sewing machine does a zigzag stitch. Does not need to be a heavy duty machine, and you do not need a heavy duty needle. Whatever regular sewing needle you've got in your machine, as long as it's not a ballpoint needle, should be fine. Universal needle, you know, Janome red tip or purple tip, all good. So we should get started, because there is a little bit of machine setup I want you to do. You may have just a regular zigzag foot on your machine that looks something like this. You can use this foot because you can do a zigzag no problem with this foot. However, if your machine comes with either of the craft feet or the open toe feet, they look clear, more like this, the F or the F2 foot. You might find doing the rope bowls a little bit easier with these feet because they're clear, and especially the F2 foot, it's very open, so you can really see your stitch. This is the foot that I'm going to use for this project. So if you have an F2 foot for your Janome machine, I would use it. Or if you have any sort of clear open toe foot for your machine, or even a clear craft foot like the F foot, you could use that too. If you have the regular zigzag foot, that's totally fine. Use what you've got. But if you have some of those extra feet, now would be a good chance to break them out, because, you know, these are the ones we don't use that often, so we may as well use them while we can. Just before we get going, I wanted to show you, this is the bowl that we're going to make today with the little loop handle. That's how we're going to finish it off. This is the easiest version of a rope bowl, just to make it round. I used the same technique just to do a little ring version with some extra rope that I had from the longer and narrower one that I also made. If you've made a rope bowl before and you want to try doing a bit of a harder technique, and by hard, I just mean harder than this one. It's not that hard. You can go ahead and try it. I even made some handles on this one. And once we get going, you'll sort of see how you can change the shape. But for now, we're going to do the round, you know, big universal bowl, kind of good for anything. You could use it for, you know, fruit or bread basket. I kind of think this one works as bread basket. This one more as like fruit or decorative on your front table or dining table. Get your rope and get your thread. Let's get the foot on your machine, thread your machine, and then I'll meet you back here to set your zigzag stitch. Okay, so I'm gonna attach my F2 foot or my open toe foot. Easy on this machine, easy on most machines. And the critical part of making a rope bowl is making sure you've got a pretty big zigzag stitch. So whatever machine you're working on, choose the zigzag stitch. On the Continental M7, I'm choosing this one. It's the number 9. It's automatically putting my stitch width and stitch length at 3 and 1.5. Now this machine can go way up to 7. So I'm gonna make this fairly large. So you can see on the screen here, as I go up in numbers, it's showing me on the screen that it's getting fatter. So I'm gonna go up to a 7. Now, if your machine only goes to a 5, then just go to a 5 or a 4. Whatever your largest stitch width is, let's do that. So for your stitch length, you wanna lengthen out that zigzag stitch. So I'm gonna go up to a 2.2. That's easy on a computerized machine because you can be so specific, but if your machine has knobs, just get as close to 2, 2.5 as you can. And the stitch should look something like this. I'll just stitch it out for you so that you can have a look. So it should be about that size. You can go a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller, but you want the stitch to catch both sides of the rope. So it needs to be big enough, thick enough, wide enough to do that. It is also important when you're getting started making the rope bowl to start as tightly wound as you possibly can. So get your rope, put the length of it mostly on the floor or beside you so that it's nice and loose so that you can keep pulling it. You'll see the end is taped. You can take that tape off. Otherwise, it's not quite as round as what we need it to be. So you can use your scissors, or I'm just using my little snips here to get that tape off. It is going to mean that the ends are like more susceptible to fraying, but it's all right. We're gonna sew it up right away. So if your ends look a little bit like worse for the wear, you can just trim them a little if you want, but it's not that big a deal. Now, I said you really only need thread and rope, but you should have a couple of fairly sturdy pins on standby, because what we're gonna do to start is really wrap that rope up, like wind it up in a little circle. And don't worry if the ends stick out a little bit, because we're gonna sew them down. And if you can, so you can see my ends are kind of coming out there, that's okay. Poke a pin, and it's tough, poke a pin right through the center. I did jab myself once when I did this, it did hurt. Right through the center like that, and then right through the other side, so you're kind of making a cross. It doesn't have to be perfect, it's not staying in for long. And basically you'll end up with a little like funny, but fairly stiff looking beginning. And even though we're gonna sew around, the first few stitches of this project, I actually want you to sew kind of straight, just so that at the beginning, everything is nice and solid. So bring it to your machine and put your presser foot down. Now make sure it's sort of all the way under. We're really only sewing on the very center loop. We don't need to attach the top and the bottom because you need that to be kind of under the presser foot a bit. So see how it's sort of centered, and really I'm only going to sew over the middle here. Presser foot down, and now pull your pins out. The pins are just to get it there, otherwise it's so fiddly. And what I'm going to do is just go forward and back. And for this project, I'm using my stop start button, not my foot pedal. I found that to be easier. So if your machine has a stop start button and you want to use it, cool. If you have a foot pedal and you want to use it, also cool. And I'm going very slow to start here. So forward, and just till I reach the end, and then back stitching all the way back. And then stopping. And you can trim the thread here if you want, because we need to reposition. We're really just getting that opening stitched up. Because going forward from here, you can just trim the little thread, it's no big deal. Going forward from here, we're going to start sewing these two sides together. Eventually, we're going to be sewing our bowl like this on the side of our machine, which means, so it's going to look like that, which means the extra rope needs to feed through on the right-hand side. So because I'm right-handed, it kind of makes the most sense for me to be like turning with my right hand and feeding with my left. But for now, I'm gonna flip over so that the tail is on the right and it's going under the foot. the tail of the rope should sort of be in line with the right hand, like sort of claw of your presser foot. So I'm gonna presser foot down. I'm starting on very slow speed. If you have speed control, go slow. And we're gonna go very slow to start and making sure that stitch is getting both sides of the rope. And at the beginning, if you need to presser foot up and pivot a little bit to start, that's fine. It gets easier the bigger it gets. This right now is the toughest part because it's so small and fiddly and stiff. But just stick with it and go slow. Even if you have to hand wheel the zigzag to get those first few stitches on either side. So you've got like the circular side and then the rope side. You have to make sure the needle is jumping from one side to the other side the whole way. Otherwise you're gonna have a hole in your bowl. I didn't plan that, but that's actually kind of catchy. All right, so I'm just hand wheeling this and kind of turning as I go. But because it's so small, it's hard to turn. So you can presser foot up and pivot instead. Presser foot down. You can hand wheel that just at the beginning if you want, or just sew very slowly. And if you can turn it, great. I'm having a hard time, so I'm just going to presser foot up and pivot just a little bit at the beginning. You are going to be able to not have to do that the whole time. As it gets bigger and you can get your fingers on it, it becomes much easier to turn. And I'm just turning it with the presser foot up and sewing one side of the rope to the other side, and it'll just magically start to get bigger. And once you've got about I'd say 1.5 inches or maybe even 2 inches, you really will be able to start like turning it on its own because you'll be able to get a grip on it. But for now, when it's really small, just go slow and turn it with the presser foot up and the needle down. Because when the needle's down, you can easily pivot like this. Presser foot up, needle down, keep going. And don't worry if the thread looks a little bit of a jumble here. You really don't notice it once it's all together. Okay, I'm getting to where I can kind of start to turn. Kind of liken it to twisting off a cap, but only with your fingertips, like kind of like that. See how slow I'm going? I'm at some point going to go very full speed, but just not at the beginning. So you can see now that I'm applying this sort of constant turning pressure. It's starting to get turning like much more easily. I'm going to turn up my speed a little bit. Okay, so take a look here. You can see the needle on the left and it's going to jump over to the right. And so I've got sort of a letter Q going here. Like if I were to go like this, I'd see like a little letter Q or a letter G. I always want the needle and the thread to be straddling the circular side and the straight side. See how it's jumping from, and then I'm twisting as we go. Like almost, it's kind of a constant twisting pressure, not like twist here and there. It's a constant twisting pressure. And just keep your eye on the needle. And that's why this foot is so useful, because you can see where you're at. And I guarantee at some point in this project, you will be sewing on only one side or another, and you might have to go back. But start really slow, and then as it gets a little bit bigger, you can turn up your speed a bit or apply a little bit more pressure on your presser foot. But again, you got to be ready to be twisting, because this comes together actually quite quickly when you turn up the speed. This is why it's important too that the rope is loose, that the machine can just bring that rope up and you're just kind of twisting and guiding. And in some ways, the quicker you go, the easier it is to spin it, because the machine helps you out quite a bit when you have a bit of speed going. You just have to make sure that that needle is always straddling both sides of the rope. We're gonna do this circular motion until our circle becomes 7 inches wide. So you can see here I'm going full tilt. You don't have to go full tilt. Mistakes happen more often at full speed. But if you get the swing of it, you get the hang of it, you could give it a try. Oh, see, I went off course a little there. See how I started sewing mostly just on this side? So just, if that happens, just stop. You don't have to pick anything out because it's just thread on this side. Put it back under where you've already started. Slow down a little bit and just make sure you're straddling. Slow down. Make sure you're straddling both sides. And you're kind of holding the side together too, because you want it to be tight. And then you can kind of get going back to speed again. So we want to be sewing like this in this circular way until the circle reaches about 7 inches. I shouldn't take my eye off of the off of the needle. Don't take your eye off the middle of the needle. That's a lesson. So let's see where we're measuring. So I'm just under 5 inches right now. So I've got, you know, another 2 inches to go before it's big enough that we can start taking the turn. So this right now, while it's all flat and about 5 inches, looks to be about a perfect coaster size. So if you were having difficulty or you didn't want to make the bowl, you could make a set of 4 or 5 coasters, and that would look super cute. So just keep going until you get to 7 inches across. It comes together really quickly, especially if you turn up the speed. You may lose time in the mistakes if you go too fast, so it's a trade-off. You can see with my left hand, now it's getting very easy to spin because it's coming off the machine, and I'm just kind of rotating it around and just kind of holding the rope in place with my right hand. I'm not really guiding it in at all. As long as I'm sort of like twisting it like the steering wheel of a car kind of thing, just gently, it's feeding through just fine now. Much easier to feed through at this stage. All right, let's take a little measure. Doesn't take long to gain inches. Oh, I'm at 6 3/4. So let's get around like maybe one more time and then we'll be there. You could do a hot pot, like to put a pan on your table with 7 to 10 inches, I'd say would be, oops, went off a little bit there. Hold on, I'm going back. Just slightly. You know, you might end up with bigger holes than that, but you don't want holes in it. So if you do see that you're getting a little hole, just go back and sew over that part. You don't need to unstitch or anything like that because you don't notice the threads at all. It kind of just blends in. But you will notice a hole, so try to watch for any holes. Like, that's why you want to make sure that needle is straddling either side the whole time. All right, let's see. Are we at 7? Aha! So we're at 7 inches. So all we're going to do now that we're at the 7 inches is lift the side of the bowl, and instead of wheeling like this, we're just going to wheel like this on its side. And kind of just bringing the bowl toward you now. Instead of turning it around, you're kind of pulling the bowl toward you. And it's sort of magical how suddenly the bowl is going to start to grow sides. And so if you wanted to make a bigger bowl, you would just stay going flatter longer. If you wanted to make a more like narrow, longer tube type, like vase kind of shape, then you would just start spinning it sooner. You'll quickly see like, ooh, I could do all kinds of shapes here. So see how it's sort of starting to make a little bowl shape? So I could stop there and make like, you know, a platter. If I wanted to just have that be like the complete shape, then I could take it back down a little bit and start flattening it out. But since I want the bowl to keep growing, I'm gonna keep it as upright as I can. Did I get a little hole there? Just dodged it. Now, some of you may be looking at this going like, all I see is a blur of white. It's hard to see the white thread. It's hard to see the stitches. It's true. But as long as you've kind of centered it in the middle of that presser foot, you can kind of trust that it's working. And you don't have to go at full speed. You can slow down. Okay. So I'm out of bobbin thread. I'm going to grab one of my pre-wound bobbins. You will go through the thread quickly, you guys. So back to loading it up. Just easier if you have them ready to go. Now I do have this sort of tail of thread, the last of it. I'm just going to snip it right down to the base. I'm not worried about it coming out because when you go back to your machine, you'll just start back maybe half an inch and sew over where you started, so there's no need to backstitch. But again, you're putting it in on the side, about an inch from where you started, and just picking it up again. This is more of an exercise in concentration than it is in sewing skill. I would say you're probably going to sew like this for about 30 minutes. And you can see now I barely have to put any pressure on the bowl at all. As long as I sort of hold it upright, like compared to the beginning, how hard we were having to really twist, now I'm just gingerly touching the sides and letting the feed dogs like bring the bowl through at the proper pace. If you have to do something like scratch or sneeze, stop sewing because it really does require your eyeballs to be on the needle. So I'm going to scratch, itch, go. If you're feeling it in your shoulder muscle, stand up so your arm can like drop a little bit. It's a bit easier. Just needed to move it over a little, just a little bit. It was getting away from me. Sometimes it's easy to just fall asleep at the wheel here. But look at how big it's getting, you guys. It does not take long at all. I'm getting towards the end of my bobbin thread again. Okay. Change the bobbin again. It's good to have these handy. Ooh, look how nice it's looking. So I'll just warn you about now, because I've got like, you know, maybe 4 feet left. When I get to have about maybe like 6 inches left, then you're gonna start to get ready to loop the handle. You know, you can make it as big or small as you want. The bigger you make it, the easier. but it also sticks out more. So it's really personal choice, but we're basically just looping it. We'll get there, but I just wanted to warn you that that's coming. All right, I have my thread tail again from the bobbin being done. Back about a ½ an inch and start it up again. Almost there. Okay, I'm almost done. You can see I've got just about a foot of rope left. That did not take long at all. And basically what I'm going to do, I'll just kind of show you here, is you can leave the tape on if you want. So I'll leave the tape on. I'm going to just bend, like take about 1.5 inches and bend at the 1.5 inch mark. You can put a pin through here just so that it stays kind of bent. Just be careful you don't push that pin through your finger. It's like really easy. And when we get to the point where we're going to sew the handle on, we're going to slow right down. We might need to hand wheel it, but let's get there first. So I'm just going to slow down now that I'm getting towards the handle. There's sort of 3 things that are happening. There's the main rope that needs to get secured, but then there's also this handle that has to get secured, and then this side needs to secure to the actual bowl itself. So we don't need to try to make that happen all in one go. We'll do it in 2 different steps. So we'll start by trying to get the real rope, like this side, like the long part, as close to the bowl as possible. And then we're going to try to sew the handle to the side of the bowl. That's what we'll do first. So let's try that. And if you have to hand wheel it, that's fine, no problem. Or just go slow on your regular. So I'm getting it as close to the tape part as possible. If it goes over the tape, that's fine. And then we're going to kind of switch over. And if you have to stop to do the switch over, you can. Switch over to where we're sewing between the taped end. Oh, stop. I don't want to run over my pin. The taped end and the handle side. And we want to leave that handle as a loop. So I only want to go up a very little bit. So just to the end of the tape is really enough. And then I'm going to actually back stitch back down to the actual bowl. Back to the bowl. And now that I'm back to the bowl, I'm going to go forward again, but this time I'm going to sew on the tape and the bowl. And if you have to stop and scissor or cut your thread and you know, that's fine. Don't sweat it. So now I'm sewing on the handle and the bowl, and I'm going up a little further than the tape. And then I'm back stitching. So about halfway up the handle I'm going. And back stitching. Back down to the main part of the bowl. And if you need to go forward again because it looks like it needs a few more stitches to secure it, that's fine. I'm going forward a little bit. On that tape part, it looked like it needed a little bit more. All right, I'm just cutting the thread. And there it is. Handle and all. That didn't take long at all. And it's got the nice big flat bottom, and then it takes the curve up. It's nice and round naturally. And there's all sorts of fun things you could do. If you wanted to do handles on both sides, like I did on this long one, you can kind of get how you just pull the rope out a little bit and skip stitching there and pick it up over on this side if you want to make handles. And I just did the same thing on that side. Just pulled the rope over a little bit, stopped stitching and back stitched, and then picked up stitching again over here. It's mostly just the miracle of the zigzag stitch that allows you to have a very steady, sturdy bowl out of just plain old rope. I hope you will make tons of these. Rope is sort of not the first thing that comes to mind when you think about sewing, but there's some very, very cool things that you can be making with rope and your zigzag stitch. If you have any questions, of course, you can leave them in the group. Message me and I'm happy to get back to you, but enjoy the rope bowl and the rope bowl making process. I hope you make lots of them.